The Selfish Giant. Long ago, there was an exquisite garden which not only had lively trees, but also had a collection of flowers that gave out a wonderful fragrance. The birds that used to regularly visit the garden sang the most melodious songs. It was truly a lovely garden. There were some children who regularly played in this beautiful garden. It was their play area, where they used to spend some lovely afternoons after school and the even more time during holidays. The birds that lived in this magnificent garden used to sing melodious tunes, which even made the kids stop their games and listen to them. However, there was a truth that no one knew, not until the day when a giant returned one day. The garden, in fact, belonged to the giant who had gone away for a long time, and no one knew about him. At times the little ones used to talk among themselves, wishing that the owner never returned. One day, the kids' fears came true as the owner of the garden returned. The owner, a big fat giant, came back stamping his feet with a loud thud. The children playing in the garden felt themselves being lifted from the ground and back as the sound got stronger. When the giant saw kids playing in his garden, he became very angry and then built a huge wall all around it and put a notice board, which said that any trespasser will be punished. The Selfish Giant had closed the door on the kids. They would come back from school and would talk about the garden. The children were sad and wished that the giant had never returned. Then spring came, beautiful flowers bloomed everywhere. An array of colors was spread all over the country, but what was the garden like, no one could see. The reality was that spring did not visit the garden this time. It was still winter in the Selfish Giant's garden. The trees had forgotten to blossom and the birds were in no mood to sing. Even the little flowers were so annoyed with the sign to ban children from coming in, that they slipped back into the ground, as they were as sad as they could be. The only ones who were happy were Snow and Frost. Having the whole space to them, both were happy to be up in spring. They thought that spring had overlooked this garden, and considered themselves as the undisputed master of the now frozen garden. The snow had painted everything white and the frost had turned all the trees silver. Both rulers of this white world now invited the North Wind, who came roaring in furs and moaned over the garden day in and day out. He roared so much that he blew all the chimney pots down. And, if this was not enough, one day the North Wind had an idea. Since we are having so much fun here, is it not a good idea that we invite Hail? Then came Hail, dressed in grey with icy cold breath. Every day for hours, it rattled on the roof of the castle, until most of the slates on the roof were broken. He ran and ran around the garden like the fastest roller coaster ride, casting havoc on the once beautiful garden. One day the giant heard lovely music while lying on his bed. He thought that it must be some of the king's musicians, who were passing by the garden. However, as the giant went towards the window, he saw a bird singing. He thought that spring had finally arrived and even a little bird song felt like the most melodious music in the world to him. The North Wind stopped dancing, the hail stopped roaring, and a deliciously sweet perfume came to him through the open window. The giant jumped out of his bed and looked out of the window, but what did he see? He saw the most beautiful sight. A few children had come in through a small hole in the garden's wall. The children were on every tree. The trees were happy that they covered themselves with flowers. The grass was happy and so were the flowers. Each one of them was waiting for the kids to come back, and here they were laughing with glee at the sight of innocent children playing around the garden. The birds tweeted, as they had never done before. However, in a corner of the garden, there was a little boy, who could not reach the branches of a tree. The tree was still covered in snow and frost, and hail was still roaring around it. The tree bent its branches to help the boy climb up, but to no avail. The child was too tiny to do so himself. The giant felt guilty about his selfish behavior, and was very sorry for what he had done. "I should have let the children play in my garden," he thought to himself. The giant was indeed very sorry, and he decided to help the small boy. He then proclaimed, "From now on the garden will be the children's playground forever and ever, and I will knock down the walls of my garden, and I'll do that for sure." The giant slowly went downstairs, softly opened the door, and slowly went into the garden. All the children ran away except for the one who was crying. He could not see the garden because of his tears. The giant picked the boy up and placed him on a branch of the tree. The flowers and birds came back, and so did the other children, when they saw the giant being kind to the boy. The boy hugged the giant and kissed him. From that day on, the giant played with all the children every day, until he grew old and weak. That was when he confined himself in his room and used to watch the children play. The boy, who had kissed him, the giant's first friend, never came back, and he longed for him to come. He used to ask the other children about him, but they had the faintest clue as to who he was and where he lived. One winter morning, the giant was getting ready. He saw the most wonderful sight from the window. The boy was standing in the farthest corner of the garden, the same boy the giant loved the most. The tree above the boy had blossoms on it, and silver fruits hung from the tree. The giant ran towards the boy and hugged him. He saw blood in his palms. The giant was angry because the boy was hurt. The giant asked the boy to name the person who hurt him and that he shall punish him. The boy calmed him down and asked him not to worry, as they were wounds of love. An unusual calmness came on the giant's face. The little boy then took his hand and told the giant he was taking him to the Garden of Paradise. Later, that afternoon, when the children came to play in the garden, they saw the giant lying on the ground with a calm smile on his face. On closer inspection, they realized that he was dead, his body covered with white flowers. The Child's Story. Once upon a time, a good many years ago, there was a traveler, and he set out upon a journey. It was a magic journey, and was to seem very long when he began it, and very short when he got halfway through. He traveled along a rather dark path for some little time, without meeting anything, until at last he came to a beautiful child. So he said to the child, "What do you do here?" And the child said, "I am always at play. Come and play with me." So, he played with that child, the whole day long, and they were very merry. The sky was so blue, the sun was so bright, the water was so sparkling, the leaves were so green, the flowers were so lovely, and they heard such singing birds and saw so many butterflies, that everything was beautiful. This was in fine weather. When it rained, they loved to watch the falling drops, and to smell the fresh scents. When it blew, it was delightful to listen to the wind, and fancy what it said, as it came rushing from its home. Where was that? They wondered! Whistling and howling, driving the clouds before it, bending the trees, rumbling in the chimneys, shaking the house, and making the sea roar in fury. But, when it snowed, that was best of all, for they liked nothing so well as to look up at the white flakes falling fast and thick, like down from the breasts of millions of white birds, and to see how smooth and deep the drift was, and to listen to the hush upon the paths and roads. They had plenty of the finest toys in the world, and the most astonishing picture books, all about scimitars and slippers and turbans, and dwarfs and giants and genii and fairies, and bluebeards and beanstalks and riches and caverns and forests and valentines and orsons, and all new and all true. But, one day, of a sudden, the traveler lost the child. He called to him over and over again, but got no answer. So, he went upon his road, and went on for a little while without meeting anything, until at last he came to a handsome boy. So, he said to the boy, "What do you do here?" And the boy said, "I am always learning. Come and learn with me." So he learned with that boy about Jupiter and Juno, and the Greeks and the Romans, and I don't know what, and learned more than I could tell or he either, for he soon forgot a great deal of it. But, they were not always learning, they had the merriest games that ever were played. They rode upon the river in summer, and skated on the ice in winter. They were active afoot, and active on horseback, at cricket, and all games at ball, at prisoner's base, hare and hounds, follow my leader, and more sports than I can think of. Nobody could beat them. They had holidays too, and 12th cakes, and parties where they danced till midnight, and real theaters where they saw palaces of real gold and silver rise out of the real earth, and saw all the wonders of the world at once. As to friends, they had such dear friends and so many of them, that I want the time to reckon them up. They were all young, like the handsome boy, and were never to be strange to one another all their lives through. Still, one day, in the midst of all these pleasures, the traveler lost the boy as he had lost the child, and, after calling to him in vain, went on upon his journey. So he went on for a little while without seeing anything, until at last he came to a young man. So, he said to the young man, "What do you do here?" And the young man said, "I am always in love. Come and love with me." So, he went away with that young man, and presently they came to one of the prettiest girls that ever was seen, just like Fanny in the corner there, and she had eyes like Fanny, and hair like Fanny, and dimples like Fanny's, and she laughed and colored just as Fanny does while I am talking about her. So, the young man fell in love directly, just as somebody I won't mention, the first time he came here, did with Fanny. Well, he was teased sometimes just as somebody used to be by Fanny, and they quarreled sometimes just as somebody and Fanny used to quarrel, and they made it up, and sat in the dark, and wrote letters every day, and never were happy asunder, and were always looking out for one another and pretending not to, and were engaged at Christmas time, and sat close to one another by the fire, and were going to be married very soon, all exactly like somebody I won't mention, and Fanny. But, the traveler lost them one day, as he had lost the rest of his friends, and, after calling to them to come back, which they never did, went on upon his journey. So, he went on for a little while without seeing anything, until at last he came to a middle-aged gentleman. So, he said to the gentleman, "What are you doing here?" And his answer was, "I am always busy. Come and be busy with me." So, he began to be very busy with the gentleman, and they went on through the wood together. The whole journey was through a wood, only it had been open and green at first, like a wood in spring, and now began to be thick and dark, like a wood in summer. Some of the little trees that had come out earliest were even turning brown. The gentleman was not alone, but had a lady of about the same age with him, who was his wife, and they had children, who were with them too. So, they all went on together through the wood, cutting down the trees, and making a path through the branches and the fallen leaves, and carrying burdens, and working hard. Sometimes, they came to a long green avenue that opened into deeper woods. Then they would hear a very little, distant voice crying, "Father, Father, I am another child. Stop for me." And presently they would see a very little figure, growing larger as it came along, running to join them. When it came up, they all crowded round it, and kissed and welcomed it, and then they all went on together. Sometimes, they came to several avenues at once, and then they all stood still, and one of the children said, "Father, I am going to sea," and another said, "Father, I am going to India," and another, "Father, I am going to seek my fortune where I can," and another, "Father, I am going to heaven." So, with many tears at parting, they went, solitary, down those avenues, each child upon its way, and the child who went to heaven, rose into the golden air and vanished. Whenever these partings happened, the traveler looked at the gentleman, and saw him glance up at the sky above the trees, where the day was beginning to decline, and the sunset to come on. He saw, too, that his hair was turning grey. But, they never could rest long, for they had their journey to perform, and it was necessary for them to be always busy. At last, there had been so many partings that there were no children left, and only the traveler, the gentleman, and the lady, went upon their way in company. And now the wood was yellow, and now brown, and the leaves, even of the forest trees, began to fall. So, they came to an avenue that was darker than the rest, and were pressing forward on their journey without looking down it when the lady stopped. "My husband," said the lady. "I am called." They listened, and they heard a voice a long way down the avenue, say, "Mother, mother." It was the voice of the first child who had said, "I am going to heaven." And the father said, "I pray not yet. The sunset is very near. I pray not yet." But, the voice cried, "Mother, mother," without minding him, though his hair was now quite white, and tears were on his face. Then, the mother, who was already drawn into the shade of the dark avenue and moving away with her arms still round his neck, kissed him, and said, "My dearest, I am summoned, and I go." And she was gone. And the traveler and he were left alone together. And they went on and on together, until they came to very near the end of the wood, so near, that they could see the sunset shining red before them through the trees. Yet, once more, while he broke his way among the branches, the traveler lost his friend. He called and called, but there was no reply, and when he passed out of the wood, and saw the peaceful sun going down upon a wide purple prospect, he came to an old man sitting on a fallen tree. So, he said to the old man, "What do you do here?" And the old man said with a calm smile, "I am always remembering. Come and remember with me." So the traveler sat down by the side of that old man, face to face with the serene sunset, and all his friends came softly back and stood around him. The beautiful child, the handsome boy, the young man in love, the father, mother, and children, every one of them was there, and he had lost nothing. So, he loved them all, and was kind and forbearing with them all, and was always pleased to watch them all, and they all honored and loved him. And I think the traveler must be yourself, dear grandfather, because this is what you do to us, and what we do to you. The Brave Little Boy. This is a short story from India, originally written by the English author, Nora Burke, during her stay in India during the early 20th century. Kunal, Veer Singh's little brother, lay in the hut, burning with fever and shooting pain in his stomach that was getting worse by the minute. Veer Singh was only about 11 years old, but was a happy and cheerful lad. He was a child of the jungle and his brother was about 6 years younger to him. He had other brothers and sisters, who unfortunately had died due to cholera or malaria. His mother brought some hot water, dipped some towels inside, and placed it on Kunal's stomach to reduce the pain. Veer Singh could see that she was in great pain and fear of losing another child, but she was trying hard not to show it. However, the towels were of no use. Veer Singh's mother said that he ought to be carried to the nearest hospital. Veer Singh's mother knew that Kunal was critical, and needed medical attention at the earliest. The people in the village considered that the hospital was the last resort, and those who were sent there, rarely returned alive. Veer Singh told his mother that he would go and call his father, who was out hunting for food. His mother asked him to stay back, as it would take days to find him. Veer Singh's father was well known far and wide as Veer Singh Bahadur or Veer Singh the Brave. He was a famous hunter and hence the title. He had survived 2 tiger attacks and saved a comrade from a tiger attack. He had big scars on his back, head, and shoulders, where claws had opened his flesh. Whenever there was a hunting expedition in the village, people wanted Veer Singh Bahadur to be with them. His mere presence gave them tremendous amount of confidence and courage. Now he, along with the other strong men from the village, were in an expedition. It was unlikely that Veer Singh would find someone to help him to take Kunal to the hospital. Kunal lay on the ground, crying in pain, and Veer Singh knew that something had to be done immediately. Otherwise, he might lose another brother. Veer Singh told his mother, "There are no men in the village, and I will take Kunal to the hospital." His mother knew there was no other choice, as she had to stay behind and look after the cattle and fields. Otherwise, they would all starve. His mother took a piece of garment and made a sling for Veer Singh, in which he could carry his brother to the hospital. His mother said with tears, "You may never get there. Go slowly and be brave." She gave him some food and water to have on the way. Veer Singh lifted Kunal and his mother helped put the sling on his back, and he set off in the orange glow of the evening. Veer Singh slowly started his journey. He was unsure whether he would ever reach the hospital, given Kunal's weight. So high was Kunal's temperature, that he could feel the heat through the sling. The hospital was about 50 miles away, and Veer Singh hoped to take a shortcut through the forest and wade through 2 rivers. This might reduce the distance by half. He also hoped that he might get a lift along the way in a bullock cart. He was afraid to cross the forest. It was dark, and the animals of prey would be searching for food. Night fell and there was a full moon that night. He saw bear and tiger tracks and avoided them, and proceeded carefully. He was afraid and started walking fast. Finally, he nearly reached the end of the forest, and he just couldn't go further. He put the sling and lied down beneath a tree. His muscles shrank back to his natural position and he felt a piercing pain. He thought he would rest for a few minutes and he lay down. Soon he was fast asleep. Suddenly he woke up with fright. He looked around to see a herd of elephants at the riverside. However, they had not seen him. There were bull and cow elephants along with their babies. Although Veer Singh was petrified, he knew he could not run with Kunal's weight. All he could do was to keep quiet and pray. Finally, the elephants left and Veer Singh quickly crossed the river on a weak bridge built from bamboo poles. He reached the other side and saw there were fresh tiger footprints. Yet, he still plodded. He cried in pain, but he did not stop. Towards midnight, he reached the second bridge. He looked for the bridge, but it had been washed away by a flash flood. He could feel the river's sound and sound of trees churning. He sat down and wondered about how he would cross this river. Kunal asked for some water, and Veer Singh brought some cold water from the river. Kunal wanted more as he was thirsty. Finally, Kunal went to sleep. Veer Singh lifted him and put him on top of his head. With the help of a bamboo pole, he began to cross the river. The deluge deafened and bruised him, yet he kept moving on. However, despite that he kept Kunal on top of his head and above the water. He finally reached the other side, fell down on the grass, very exhausted, and drained of any energy. He was wet and it was icy cold. Yet, Veer Singh kept moving on. Suddenly, he saw people, and he passed out. The next thing he knew was that he was in a bullock cart, and then a truck. Finally, they reached the hospital. The hospital staff and the people around could not believe that he had carried the little boy for over 50 miles. He felt shy when they started calling him Veer Singh Bahadur. The doctor came and asked for Veer Singh Bahadur and Veer Singh replied, "My father is not here." The doctor smiled and asked him, "Are you the little boy who carried his brother for over 50 miles?" Veer Singh replied, "Yes." The doctor then said, "You are not Veer Singh, but Veer Singh Bahadur. Come in and see your brother. He will live." The power of silence. Joe was an old man aged 75 years. He lived very happily and formed a beautiful family. His children grew up and moved to different cities in pursuit of good career and future. He lived in a small village carrying the memories of his deceased wife. Joe had 4 grandchildren and they used to visit him during their holidays. And it was the vacation time and Joe was eagerly waiting for the arrival of his grandchildren. He was preparing his home for the kids, cleaning the home, mowing the garden, rearranging the household items, buying the favorite foods, dresses for the children, etc. In the busy arrangements, he lost his favorite watch. Old watch. The watch was gifted by his dead wife when their first child was born. Joe treasured the watch and it became his sole companion after his wife's death. He forgot the watch missing and was happy receiving the kids at home. It was only the next day when he was about to take bath. He remembered that the watch was missing. He saw the watch last when he was arranging things in the barn. He was shocked and very upset. His grandchildren asked him why he was so dull and asked him what troubled him. Joe said, "Dear children, I lost the most precious watch I have ever had and I ever got in my life. It was gifted by your grandma and I lost it while cleaning the home. I feel like I'm missing my heart." Joe was on tears and the children promised him that they would search the watch for him. One granddaughter asked Grandpa, Do you remember when you saw the watch last before it was missing? Joe told, I guess when I was cleaning the barn. The children decided to search for the watch in the barn. The barn was full of waste materials, books, scraps, broken furniture, etc. The children searched for more than 2 hours with help of Joe and a servant, but could not find it. Joe was completely shattered and asked the children to stop searching as they could not find anything. The kids were also too sad, and consoled the grandfather. One grandson again moved to the barn, and Joe asked why he was going there again. The little boy requested others not to follow him and remain silent. While the others were little surprised, they still followed what he said. The little boy went to the barn and sat there in silence. The other children reached him and asked him what he was doing, and the little boy asked them not to make noise. He sat there for about 15 minutes and then rushed to his grandfather. Yes, he got the watch and happily gave it to Joe. He was surprised and asked how he was able to find it. The little boy replied, I sat there without making a noise and the barn was so silent. After a few minutes, I heard the tick-tick sound and found the watch. Joe hugged him and thanked the little boy. This is the power of silence. If we stay calm, we can find the solution very easily.